Now I would like to introduce our first speaker, whom I've had the pleasure of meeting earlier. And we were next to each other there across the table, and we have the same position. And so the certain affinity has already developed between both the distinguished participants and myself. Dr. Ahmad Farouk Musa is chairman and director of the Islamic Renaissance Front in Malaysia. A very important organization. I'm sure some of you know about this front already. He's the founder and director of the Islamic Renaissance Front, with its acronym of IRF, an intellectual movement and a think tank focusing on youth empowerment and promotion of intellectual discourse and reformation. He has been involved in interfaith dialogues, especially related to Christian-Muslim relations, and also intrafaith dialogues, especially the Shia-Sunni discourse, which is very important these days, considering what's happening in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Syria, and yes, even here. He writes for a column at the Islamic Party, PAS. We are all aware of this party, which has been around here and has a following. Official organ and other established web portals like Malay Siakini, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. My Malay is somewhat rusty. The Malayan Insider and Free Malaysia Today. Dr. Ahmad Farouk is an academician at Monash University, Malaysian campus, and is also a trained cardiothoracic surgeon. Monash is a well-known university in Australia, so that gives him another cachet to carry on his activities. So let's give Dr. Ahmad Farouk Musa a hand, please, before we start. You have the floor.
Thank you, Prof. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. All right, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you, distinguished guests today, and our moderator and esteemed speaker as well. And first of all, I'd like to say that by profession, I'm a surgeon, a cardiothoracic surgeon, but it has been my sort of, how do I say, ingrained in my DNA probably, to be a Muslim activist, and who have been involved in activism since my student days. So this issue is not a new issue to me, and I've been talking about this for years, right, since my student days until today. And I guess this is a very important topic because with the, what happened during 9/11, for example, it has spurred the interests of people all over the world, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, about what is wrong with Islamic fundamentalism or Islamic extremism in a way. Of course, extremism does not only exist in the religion of Islam. It exists everywhere, in every other religion as well. You can see Buddhist extremism, you can see Hindu extremism, or even Christian extremism. But still, when people talk about extremism, it's about Islam. It is closely related to one particular religion, that is Islam. Whether we like it or not, we have to address what's the root of this extremism. So I would start my talk today by basically referring to one incident recently, what happened in the United Kingdom that shocked the whole world, when one military personnel was being butchered in daylight, right, by two Muslims, right? Of course, when the news broke out, initially there were a lot of denials. A lot of denials on Facebook, for example, like Facebook's spread like wildfire nowadays. So everybody was saying that they're going to pin down on Muslims, and it turned out to be true. Muslims were the perpetrators of this heinous act of killing these army personnel, unarmed army personnel, walking down the road in broad daylight. And what did the former British Prime Minister say? Tony Blair, he said, there is a problem within Islam from the adherence of an ideology which is a strain within Islam, right? So now Islam has been portrayed as a religion of peace. Now where does this come from? So he might be right or he might be wrong. Well, we can argue about it, but the most important thing is that I think he missed the mark where the problem lies, right? Because I think it is not the problem inherent in the religion of Islam itself, but it is the mindset of a few Muslims, all right, that have been transformed, that has transformed them to become militants, or in a way that they want to portray, that this is what Islam is all about. It's kind of a retribution, and we'll go into that later on, right? But they assume the role of being a savior of Islam, right? Of a religion that's been, for them, been persecuted in this world. So to me, when I want to pinpoint where's the problem or the root of all this extremism, I would say that they are mainly broadly categorized into two, right? What I would call it as an exogenous factor and an endogenous factor, right? Something which is inherent, something which is inside, internal, and something which is external, or indigenous, endogenous, and exogenous. Right? It might. This is a medical term initially, actually, but I use it over here. Yeah, I would say that exogenous. To say exogenous is because of this foreign policy, yeah, basically of the West. I say that this, as we are aware of this foreign policy of the West, that can be considered antagonistic towards the Muslim, especially in the Middle East, for example. So this must have created a lot of tension, right, between the Muslim communities and the West itself. And as we can see that the Woolwich butcher, the Boston bomber in the US, right, and even Osama bin Laden, all of them insisted that the aggression was basically the articulation of, in religious language, was a payback for political blunders over the years. Meaning to say that it's a way, as I said to you just now, there's a retribution, an act of retribution, right, to pay back. This is payback time, our payback time. We have had your time, this is our time. And that's what these Muslim extremists are trying to say. They may rationalize their act, right, through violent scriptures. Of course, they quoted the verses from the Holy Quran, and there are many verses in the Holy Quran about fighting, about jihad, about killing infidels, and so on and so forth. But they're putting it in modern terms, and basically these are basically the reasons or the things that they could use to rationalize the acts of aggression. Now let's just go back and look at this some statistics, okay? And according to the Lancet, all right, at least 116,000 Iraqi civilians died between the outbreak of war in 2003 and the withdrawal of troops in 2011. So they had a moral justification there, like hundreds of thousands, 116,000 of Iraqis were killed because of the American incursion into their country, right? So they felt that it's kind of an act of retribution. You have killed so many thousands of us, so why can't we act back? So that's their rationalization. That's how they should rationalize their violent behavior, right? And furthermore, more than 16,000 are thought to have been killed in Afghanistan since 2007. Right? We have heard of of drones killing some of the leaders, and of course, what they term as collateral damage. Civilians were being killed as well, right? And of course, there are drones. Drones have killed even adolescent. I think it's a son of Anwar al-Awlaqi in Yemen, if I'm not mistaken. And I mean, people question. I mean, what was his sin? He's just a son of Anwar al-Awlaqi, and yet a drone killed him in Yemen, right? So, you know, these are the things that somehow or rather that things that are very difficult for, especially for Muslim extremists to digest, right? So they try to manifest the anger, right, by doing violent acts. And even May this year marked the deadliest month, where 1,055 deaths in Iraq, right, since 2008. Of course, right, all this would take a colonial mindset to ignore the statement by what they consider as the enemies, the Muslims, extremists, and religion. They are trying to say that it's not our military mistakes, but it's basically because of the Muslim extremism. Probably people would say that that's the colonial mindset. So in conclusion, so these exogenous factors are like decades of colonialism, right? For years, many Muslim countries are being under colonial imperialist rule, right? Unjust wars to promote Western interest. As we had known that, you know, when they invaded Iraq, they created a scenario saying that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And when they invaded Iraq, no weapons were found, right? And similar thing in Syria, for example. We have seen that you know, the main reason was because the usage of poison gas, right? And that was the main reason for them to, initially, they wanted to wage an all-out war against Syria, against Syrian government, for example. And support for all-rich tyrannical regimes and drone strikes, as I mentioned just now, and maim scores that kill and maim scores of innocent people. And this support of tyrannical regime shows basically a Western hypocrisy, right? On one side, you are saying that you want to promote democracy, good governance, transparency, accountability, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, you are seen to support regimes such as the Saudi Arabia. And, and we all know that the majority of the Twin Tower bombers were basically Saudis. If I'm not mistaken, probably a dozen of them, right? They were Saudis. And you know that how these tyrannical regimes were basically were channeling their oil money to destabilize or to shape how a revolution should be, like to shape the Egyptian revolution, for example, the Arab Spring in Egypt, according to RAND Institute, for example, that I think they had, Saudi Arabia had invested about $60 billion to make sure that, you know, whatever that happened in Egypt would be in their interest, basically. And that's how the Salafis got the upper hand. When the Salafis initially said that, you know, to go against the government was basically an act of treason, basically, because they say it's an act in the Muslim language, it's called Khawarij, an act of the Khawarij to act against a legitimate government. So they were against it initially. But then, of course, the Saudi came in and invested so much to ensure that is in line with their ideology. Now, after looking at these exogenous factors, we come to the second factor. I would say the endogenous factors, right? Now, Rich Nielsen of Harvard University published a study recently and found that the main factors driving radicalism were not poverty or ideology of teachers. Rather, it was the poor quality of academic and educational networks. And that's what this Harvard professor found, right? So, you see, based on his research, he found that clerics with best academic networks had 2 to 3% chance of becoming self-styled jihadists, as opposed to 50% chance for those who were badly networked. This is happening in the Muslim world, and not only in Saudi Arabia, not only in Middle Eastern countries, but you see even in our country, in this particular country, in Malaysia, right, where all the Muslim students, even from the middle class families, were being sent to what you call to the madrasas, or these private Islamic schools. And the level of education, we know the level of education. The teachers were not well paid. The teachers were just, had a very minimal pay. And because of that, they did not manage to give good education to these people. And they came from even middle class families, because these people believe probably is because sense of guilt. Like my generation, right? I live in a generation where we send our kids, we have the choice to send to Islamic schools or send to government schools, or other private schools, for example. And many of us, our generation, tend to send, especially the activists, tend to send the children to Islamic schools. Because why? Feelings of guilt. We did not get enough and adequate Islamic education. So we feel that, we should send our children to have Islamic education. But the schools were just terrible, right? So these are the products. These are the possible products of such schools everywhere in this world, especially the Muslim world. So as we know that even though of course, in many countries in the Muslim world, you're not supposed to just follow one teacher, right? But the thing is that the critical thinking is not being developed among the Muslim children. That is lacking among the Muslim students who were schooled at these Islamic institutions. Now they're being taught to just follow their teachers. So, in fact, in this country, this, how do I say, this monolithic style of Islam, right, is being perpetrated. Even recently, even yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, the youth, UMNO, which is the predominant party in this country, thank you. Prominent party in this country said that, there should only be one Islam in this country, that is the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or what is known as the Sunni Islam, not Shiites, not Mu'tazilites, right? So there must be only one strain of Islam in this country. And this is very bad, because they want us to follow just one singular entity. That is their interpretation of what Islam should be all about. And this is very problematic. I'll just go very quick, because I passed my time. Yeah. So I would say that the thing is that these people, they could just quote verses from the Quran, but whether these verses were probably quoted out of context is another issue, right? So you can quote verse about killing infidels, for example, but can you apply that to the 21st century, right? So these are the things. Or you quote verses about jizya, about paying a tax by the non-Muslims, right, to ensure that they don't have to have any obligation to be involved in the military, for example. So they're supposed to pay jizya, and the verse of jizya was in the Quran. So if you quote jizya, for example, in the 21st century, is that applicable nowadays? Right? So these are the things that we have to understand. Then, as I say, this issue of extremism, actually it was addressed even long ago by the Prophet himself. In one well-known hadith, long hadith. Somehow or other, there was a phrase there. He quoted that these people, no matter how much they are considered as very religious, but they recite the Quran, it doesn't pass their throats. It means that the spirit of Quran was not embedded inside them, right? So it's just the superficial understanding of Islam itself. Just a quick one, okay? Just a quick one. So just look at Ayman al-Zawahiri. Everybody knows Ayman al-Zawahiri, right? Second man after Osama bin Laden, right? So he has this understanding, this antagonism towards democracy. So he considers that democracy is basically usurping the sovereignty of God itself. Because it usurps the sovereignty of God, this is shirk. This is basically unacceptable. So meaning to say that this ideology is not compatible to democracy. It's not compatible to the 21st century understanding of what democracy is all about. This is a problem, right? It's a problem. And similarly, you look at another strain in another movement in the Islamic world, Hizb ut-Tahrir, for example. They have the same understanding that Islam or that democracy is nizamul kufur, is a heretic system. It's a system that is out of Islam. And you have this Hizb ut-Tahrir is a very strong movement even in the UK, and I heard recently even in Australia. And actually, Australia, Sydney wanted to invite me to have a debate with them recently, but I didn't want to go. Because it's useless to have a debate with people with this kind of mentality, right? Because we won't be able to go anywhere. Right? I'm my final slide, okay? 2 slides, okay? So what are the solutions? So I would say that, because I've categorized it between exogenous and endogenous. So the solution would be 2 as well, for the exogenous and for the endogenous. So what would be the solution for the exogenous? Would be to review the policies. The West must review the policies, right? Their policies, how they treat Muslims and how their foreign policies with Muslim countries, for example. And they should also consider whether their attitude is right or wrong, right? To invade other countries, to say that we want to restore democracy, but in actual fact, probably it's because of their economic agenda. That is what I perceive, right? And of course, finally, is the endogenous thing is that we have to educate the Muslims, the young minds especially, about what the concept of Islam, or the concept of jihad, for example. What is jihad all about? And we have to make them understand that Islam is a religion of peace, and Islam accepts pluralism. We should embrace not only other sects within Islam, but also other religions as well, to live basically as human, as brothers, and like what the first session said, that that we are all children of Adam, right? وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam, and we have conferred dignity upon the children of Adam. All of us, Muslim or non-Muslims, should have this dignified status in this world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there will be an animated discussion, a good discussion based on what Dr. Musa has told us. This is a very complicated subject, and he has touched on some relevant points, but we will discuss them as in the question and answer session, and of course in my final summing up.